Now before we get into the full review, let's get the specifications out of the way. Longtime fans and followers of OnePlus will notice that the OnePlus 3 has a pretty radically changed design. There's no longer a removable backing, and the backing is no longer of sandstone black material. Now you have a complete unibody metal design that is a little bit larger due to the 5.5-inch screen, but it's also incredibly thin. This is definitely a sleek and slender device with all of the different bits and pieces exactly where you would expect them to be. It's also quite minimalistic with only the OnePlus logo on the back right underneath the camera optic package. And on the top left there is still the alert slider returning from the OnePlus 2 and the OnePlus X. Handling is not too difficult an affair. Even in one-handed usage, it's not too hard to get from one side to the other, but getting to the top with this 5.5-inch screen is a little bit tougher, so you're probably going to be using two hands more often than not. However, the main gripe that is here is that the metal is quite slippery. It's a very smooth metal, and though it does give it a very sleek look, it might also sleek right out of your hands. And that is the reason why OnePlus probably gave us 5 different cases showing all of the different materials that otherwise would have been backings for the phone, but instead, these are all covers that you can snap onto the back of the device. Sandstone black is still a material that a lot of other companies aren't using, and now on the OnePlus 3, we simply don't have that anymore. What you have is a metal phone, much like plenty of other phones in the market today, and if you really want to have that better grip on the phone because this metal is quite slippery, you're going to have to use those covers, and that's a little bit of a nuisance, no matter which way you put it. And though we might be a little bit sad that OnePlus has stepped backwards in their design department, we do think that OnePlus has created what can be considered, though typical, a very nice looking metal phone. Given that this device is supposed to be somewhat affordable, it's no surprise that 1080p resolution comes in this 5.5-inch AMOLED screen. That said, however, it would have been nice to see Quad HD in a phone that is supposed to be a flagship killer for 2016. But 1080p is still nice and still provides just enough sharpness for the real estate that it provides, and it's still fun to use for everything from gaming to media consumption. That said, the AMOLED screen does provide a couple of extra features, including the ambient display. It does have a very similar ambient display to devices like the Nexus 6 and the Nexus 6P, only you can actually wave your hand near the front of the device and it will trigger it as well. There's also the night mode, which is nice to have, especially if you are a night owl that is always looking at the phone. Turning on the night mode will bump up the warmth of the color temperature way high so that it's easier on the eyes, especially when you're in dark conditions. Overall, the screen on the OnePlus 3 is standard for the most part, but it is a standard that OnePlus nails. But the same can be said for performance, where OnePlus has actually provided a little bit more on top of the performance package we need in flagships today. The Snapdragon 820 provides great performance. We've had pretty much no slowdown or stutter in any application or any part of the interface in Oxygen OS, and that could also be attributed to Oxygen OS's more minimalistic design. That said, however, performance is still top-notch, especially when gaming. We've had a lot of fun with Skyforce Reloaded and have been able to have a lot of apps in the background even when playing these games. And the reason for that is because OnePlus put in 6 GB of RAM. When we're using this phone, we actually don't notice any of the applications just not responding or even quitting because it runs out of the ability to keep those in the memory. So it's a nice little step forward for OnePlus and definitely something that they will be able to boast in the OnePlus 3 moving forward. We'll start off talking about the hardware by saying yes, there is in fact NFC in this device. Where the OnePlus 2 had a bit of a misstep and a lot of people pointed it out, the OnePlus 3 clearly has NFC available, so you will be able to do Android Pay and also do connections through NFC. Call quality was quite good with no complaints on either end of the calls, and there were no dropped calls either when using this particular phone on the T-Mobile network. And speaking of sound, the speaker on the bottom right next to the USB Type-C port is adequately loud. It doesn't have that much body to it, but it's something that you would expect from a bottom-mounted single speaker. But speaking of audio, the headphone jack actually drives headphones pretty well. It's a little bit louder than a couple of other ones out there and definitely not quite as loud as the HTC 10, but it's still a very enjoyable experience. Straight out of the box, the fingerprint reader performs very well. Once you get your fingerprint read and scanned into the phone, it's just a matter of putting a finger down on that particular area, and in under a second, the phone will be woken up and unlocked right away. The alert slider makes a return, and in the OnePlus 2, I didn't find myself using it a whole lot because I do happen to use a smartwatch. But lately, with the OnePlus 3, I did find myself changing the toggle, just easily finding it because of the textured button, or slider rather, and being able to turn it off for full silence or for all notifications. It is a nice tool to have if, in a pinch, you need to be able to turn off all of the notifications on your phone so you don't disturb anybody. Battery life on the OnePlus 3 is fairly standard, given that it is a 3000 mAh battery with a 5.5-inch display on a Snapdragon 820. But I still got 3.5 hours of screen on time despite somewhat heavier usage that included music playing and navigation throughout the day. But the best part about the OnePlus 3 is the return of fast charging, which was missing in the OnePlus 2. And this time, dash charging is what OnePlus is boasting, and it brings 60% of battery life in just half an hour's worth of charge. And that is actually quite incredible, very easy to use when you are running out of juice. You just have to plug the phone in for a little bit and you'll get the power you need to get through the rest of the day. And yes, the cable is still red, but it is not flat anymore. The camera of the OnePlus 3 comes with a pretty good app, pretty nice and intuitive, not too hard to use. It's very similar to the one that was in the OnePlus 2. It does come with the ability to swipe on the viewfinder to change the different modes, but once you get to panorama, you still have to go into the vertical orientation, and then you have to swipe differently to get to the other modes again. It's just a little bit annoying. But after that, you have the manual mode that allows you to change the shutter speed, the white balance, and even the focus points. And you also have a nice little feature that was introduced in the OnePlus 2, which is the ability to tap onto the area you want for your exposure and then move the focus point somewhere else. It's actually kind of nice, pretty intuitive, and I think it's something that should be available in the auto mode also. Despite some steps forward in the cameras, like having an 8-megapixel camera on the front, unfortunately the camera quality of the OnePlus 3 is simply average at best. The main reason here, especially for low light shots, is that at f2.0 aperture, it needs to have a longer shutter speed. Now, no OIS in the world is going to be able to compensate for a very long shutter speed, so if you have shaky hands, blurry photos can definitely happen. That said, however, overall quality of these photos also tends to be lacking, especially when it comes to colors in most shots. There are a few shots where the colors actually look quite good, but other ones, the colors have that lack of saturation to really take the vibrancy of the scene. This also happens in video. Now, though videos do tend to look pretty smooth, you do see the noise in these videos as well, despite this video being in 4K resolution. There are even a couple of other missteps, like in panorama mode, when the stitching over on the right side of this photo just wasn't done very well. Now, though we know that updates in the future might be able to make the camera a little bit better, it's just a bit of a disappointment that the camera is again the main place that OnePlus finds themselves stumbling in their flagship killer. Oxygen OS has been updated to Android Marshmallow, and just like in the OnePlus 2, it doesn't have too many extras when compared to, let's say, stock Android. As a matter of fact, it actually looks a lot like stock Android. But in this version of Android, I actually think that some of the features OnePlus does bake in are finally really ironed out. They do provide some nice functionality, and they could be features that could make stock Android a little bit better. The shelf returns and is a place for you to put all of your different widgets. Now, the widgets can be scrollable like this calendar here, and that is really nice to have. But this little touch that's added in is the memo, a quick way of just jotting down a quick note, and it's actually kind of nice to have for those times when you do need to have some information at the ready on the shelf. A feature that stock Android, even the Android N beta that's out right now, has been unable to consistently have is the dark mode. And I think the dark mode is still a great feature of Oxygen OS because it provides that just little bit of customization, especially since you can pick an accent color, so you can really make the phone look kind of what you want it to look like. The buttons on the bottom are now dots rather than lines, but it still serves the same purpose. They don't have to adhere to what they look like, and they are fully customizable. You can swap what the buttons do, or you can make new functions happen if you were to double tap or hold onto any of the 3 buttons on the bottom. It's a little bit of customization that gives just that little bit of character to Oxygen OS, and for the end user, it's nice to have that little bit of control. Whereas I felt that Oxygen OS was trying too hard to be like stock Android and also like Cyanogen from before mixed together, now Oxygen feels like it has its own identity, and that might be the best part about the software, on top of the fact that it is really smooth. The OnePlus 3 is available now for $399, actually a great price when you consider you don't need an invite to buy this phone anymore. Overall, the OnePlus 3 does a great job of hitting all the right notes, especially for that price point. But the phrase we have to look at now is not necessarily flagship killer, but never settle. Did OnePlus maybe step back a little bit by creating a phone that, for all intents and purposes, is a lot like everyone else? Well, for typical users, this phone is still going to be a wonderful choice. But for die-hard OnePlus users, maybe there's just that little bit less to be excited about this year. What happens when a phone manufacturer takes all of the flagship conventions and puts them in a package that is not only nailing those conventions, but is actually really affordable? Back in the day, we called that the OnePlus One. And I think that the reason the OnePlus 2 was a misstep is because they lost sight of that philosophy. Instead of providing the best features for a good price, which is their claim to fame, they tried to put in features that were forward-thinking but not fully fleshed out. That has changed now with the OnePlus 3, that melds the philosophies of the OnePlus One and the OnePlus 2 together. But in doing so, OnePlus had to make a couple of compromises, and maybe they also needed to create a phone that appealed to pretty much everybody, and to do so, they had to bend to convention.